Pikmin is a series of contradictions. Style-wise, it's a cute, happy game about small little plant guys that can be led to their less than dignified deaths. Gameplay-wise, it's about working together as a team to accomplish tasks effectively, but story-wise, it's about outsiders exploiting nature to accomplish things that really only benefit them. Genre-wise, it's kind of similar to a real-time strategy game, but it isn't nearly as intricate as mainstays in that genre. It's a lot harder to describe how Pikmin plays in a word or two when compared to other Nintendo IPs. You jump, you quest, you shoot ink, you build a town, you race, you manage? That's the best verb I have for Pikmin, is manage, but manage what exactly? Well, it depends on which Pikmin game we're talking about. As of this writing, there are 4 mainline Pikmin games, and while their mechanics are pretty much the same, each one has a distinct feel not found in the other titles. So, how did they do it? Well, by tweaking what the player manages in each adventure, every entry offers a completely different gameplay experience. In Pikmin 1, the player is tasked with managing time. When Captain Olimar crash lands on a mysterious alien planet, he reckons that he has 30 days before the planet's atmosphere will kill him, rated E for everyone. From its very first moment, the game informs the player that the clock, more so than any creature on the planet, is the enemy. But, of course, Olimar is not alone. He has a squad of Pikmin, these small creatures that he can throw at enemies and obstacles. They can fight, they can push boxes and break down walls, they can carry pellets and bug corpses back to home base to make more Pikmin, and they can retrieve parts from Olimar's crashed spaceship as the player finds them. There are 30 ship parts scattered across the distant planet, and the goal of the game is to retrieve those parts within 30 in-game days. Of course, the more Pikmin in Olimar's army, the more prepared he'll be when faced with Pikmin 1's more harrowing foes. So get your squad numbers up, but don't spend too long farming these guys. The clock is ticking. After the first introductory day, the timer officially starts. Each of the following 29 days is made up of 13.5 minutes, so the player has 13.5 minutes allotted to find each part. The game has to be completed within 391 minutes and 30 seconds, which is just over 6.5 hours. After that, the game ends, no matter how many ship parts you found. Good luck. There are 3 types of Pikmin in the first game: red, yellow, and blue. Each has a certain obstacle that only they can overcome. The reds are immune to fire, the yellows can reach high ledges and carry explosives, and will later become immune to electricity, and blues are the only ones that can cross bodies of water. While it's undoubtedly important for the player to keep their Pikmin count as high as possible, it stops being an issue within a handful of in-game days. As long as Olimar harvests a few pellets and brings the creature corpses back to home base, the player will end up with plenty of little dudes to take on the rest of the game. Olimar can only have 100 Pikmin out in the field at any one time, so if the player gets 100 of each type and is able to keep those numbers steady, maintaining a healthy army won't be too much of a challenge. No, the challenge is the relentless countdown. I was pretty young when I played this game for the first time, and the threat of certain death looming over me prevented me from getting too far. I would start a new game, play it up until I unlocked, the 3rd area, and then start a new save file. It's kind of the equivalent of, booting up Mario 64 and just running around the castle. I enjoyed Pikmin, but I couldn't overcome the game's biggest hurdle: pushing past the dread. When I finally beat the game for the first time as a teenager, it wasn't nearly as difficult as my younger self thought it would be. Seriously, 29 days is plenty of time to get all of the parts, and you don't even need all of them to get a decent ending. But that immovable deadline still looms over the first voyage to the distant planet. I can't have been the only one who is freaked out by the time limit of Pikmin 1, because it's nowhere to be found in Pikmin 2. The direct sequel is such a leap in scale it makes the original look almost like a tech demo by comparison. Instead of 1 captain, the player controls 2. Instead of 3 types of Pikmin, there are now 5. In addition to the small open worlds, Pikmin 2 contains explorable caves that function kinda like dungeons. And instead of 30 days to complete the game, Pikmin 2 gives the player as much time as they need. The intent, I would imagine, is to allow the player to explore the distant planet on their own terms, to explore every last corner of its world. There are a grand total of 201 treasures to find over the 4 main levels and 14 caves. In terms of playtime, it's about 3 times the length of the original. There's just a lot more to Pikmin 2. So where then does the challenge come from? Well, instead of time, Pikmin II tasks the player with managing Pikmin populations. Pikmin II has the usual red, yellow, and blue Pikmin that can get to sustainable populations with minimal effort. The newly added purple and white Pikmin work a little differently. In some of the caves, Olimar will come across these flowers called candy pop buds. Throwing a little dude inside will cause it to change color. Each flower yields 5 changed Pikmin. It's the only way to grow the population of purples and whites. And you'll need a hearty number of both to complete the game. Purples are 10 times heavier than the average Pikmin, so they're clutch in certain boss battles and are required to move certain obstacles. Whites are immune to poison, which appears as a hazard about as often as fire or electricity. These two Pikmin types are inherently more valuable due to their scarcity, which encourages the player to be more careful on any expedition that includes them. Even though it's possible to enter caves, find flowers, and farm purples and whites forever, the player almost always has fewer of these compared to the other types. It's a lot easier to build your populations of red, yellows, and blues. You don't really have to work for them. Pikmin II's true management challenges lie in those darn caves. The captains can bring up to 100 Pikmin into a cave, and each cave will consist of a series of floors, each with their own creatures to defeat, puzzles to solve, obstacles to overcome, and treasures to find. The player is limited to the 100 Pikmin they brought with them. If some of them kick the bucket, that's too bad. I should probably also mention that Pikmin II does not care about your feelings. These caves are filled to the brim with hostility. On a blind playthrough, your Pikmin will die. A lot. The player is tasked with keeping as many of their troops alive as possible. After all, there's no telling what lies deeper in the darkness, although a boss battle will be a pretty good guess. Make sure you bring enough Pikmin to the final floor to defeat it. The bosses drop good treasures once they're defeated, so make sure you don't lose too many troops in the fight, because you still need to bring that treasure back to base. In Pikmin II, the challenge comes from staying resilient in the face of adversity. If you ask me, this is the most difficult game in the series due to these challenges. And like other difficult games, Pikmin II expects the player to lose. It expects the player to experience defeat and learn from their mistakes. It's just that the mistakes involve your hard-working plant buddies dying by the droves. And while that challenge is most apparent in the caves, the careful resource management doesn't stop when above ground due to the aforementioned scarcity of the purple and white Pikmin. It eases the tension, but does not eradicate it entirely, which, if you ask me, is excellent pacing. The predictably titled Pikmin III brings even more tweaks that radically change its gameplay. The most notable change is how this entry treats its captains. In Pikmin III, the player is tasked with managing squads. There are 3 captains this time around: Alf, Brittany, and Charlie. They're on the prowl for fruit to bring back to their home to solve a planet-wide food shortage. The crew has a stockpile of juice at the beginning of the game, and at the end of each day, the crew drinks one of the bottles. Run out of juice, and it's game over, but collect a fruit, and it can be squeezed. The crew can explore for another day. The fruit search can be greatly expedited by taking advantage of the ways Pikmin III prioritizes multitasking. Since there are 3 captains this time around, there can be up to 3 squads active at any given time. It's not too overwhelming though, due to the commands that can be given to idle squad leaders. If the player is in control of Brittany, they can pick a point on the map and she'll walk to it by herself. The player can switch to another captain and have him do some exploring until she arrives at her destination. Pikmin III also includes challenges that involve using multiple squads at the same time. An early challenge puts one captain on one side of the river and another captain on the other. They will each have to build one half of a bridge to reunite. In order to find all the bridge pieces, the player has to throw specific types of Pikmin across the river to the other captain. There are hazards on both sides of the river that can't be overcome unless the 2 captains share their squads. The player has to multitask in order to make it through the day unscathed. There are other puzzles that require one captain throwing another captain to a platform so they can create a separate squad of their own. Sometimes that captain has to throw the 3rd captain to create another squad to find a fruit. This boss battle sticks out. This beady longleg starts the battle on one side of the wall but will mosey on over to the other. Having a single squad travel from one side of the wall to the other each time is a viable strategy, but it's much more efficient to split into 2 squads and place one on either side of the wall. While dividing labor was a feature in Pikmin II, in Pikmin III it's the defining feature. In fact, the added stages in the Deluxe version of Pikmin III are all about using 2 squads to accomplish tasks within a time limit. And yes, there is a time limit. Pikmin III brings back the game-ending deadline but puts it into the hands of the player. Instead of a hard timeline, the player can keep exploring as long as they have a stockpile of juice. If the juice supply is looking a little low, well, the player only has themselves to blame. You should have found more fruit. That being said, the Pikmin themselves don't need to be managed as much, especially when compared to the previous entry. The new Pikmin edition, Rocked and Winged, are able to reproduce just like the rest of them. Getting up to 100 of each type is no problem. Just send the pellets back and harvest the bugs and you'll be just fine. Pikmin III is about as difficult as the first game, I'd say. Maybe it's a little easier depending on which difficulty option you select. However, it feels a lot easier than the previous two entries, even though the story stakes are raised. Remember, a whole planet will starve if you fail. There's not a looming death date, or Pikmin that are more precious than others. It's all about being efficient and working together. Do that, and the mission will be a success. 10 years would pass before the world was treated to another mainline Pikmin game. Sure, there's that 3DS experiment and the mobile app, but the real treat is Pikmin IV. I don't know if it's because the new hasn't fully worn off yet, but I think Pikmin IV is the best one so far. It takes everything that worked about the previous entries and fleshes out those concepts as much as possible. The caves are back. You have a dog now. There are tower defense missions, there are timed challenges, and there are versus battles baked into the campaign. There are 6 areas to explore, the most in any game yet, and they're all fantastic. While there's not a time limit in any form, the special Dandori challenges task the player with completing a set of goals within a strict time limit. Failing these challenges isn't catastrophic, you can just try again after all, but they do become rather difficult towards the end of the game. Time management is an important skill, but Pikmin IV isn't going to end in Armageddon if it isn't finished within 7 hours. The caves also return to test resource management. 100 Pikmin come in, hopefully around that many come out. And while Pikmin IV only features one playable captain, Ochi the rescue dog can become a secondary leader if need be. There are some places only the captain can go, and there are some places only the puppy can go. So while Pikmin IV plays the hits, so to speak, there's one key change that completely upends the Pikmin formula as we know it: the way new Pikmin types are acquired. In the other 3 Pikmin games, finding a new type of Pikmin is accompanied by finding their onion, which allows that type of Pikmin to reproduce. That's what makes the purple and white Pikmin so rare in the second game, their lack of onion. For every other type of Pikmin, their onion is found right away, and the player can go about farming the new addition to their team. In Pikmin IV, that's not the case. The red Pikmin will be introduced first with their onion, nothing out of the ordinary there. However, the second type of Pikmin the player will typically find are the new ice Pikmin. They're found in the Last Frost Cavern, a cave sitting out in the open of the Sun-Speckled Terrace, the game's first area. In it, 10 ice Pikmin can be recruited into your squad. Except, where is their onion? For the entirety of the first, second, and third areas of Pikmin IV, the ice Pikmin can only be found in the wild or by using a candy pop bud. The ice Pikmin could bring a pellet or corpse back to the base, but no new ices will sprout. So be careful with your ice Pikmin. They're required to overcome certain obstacles, but if they get lost, well, they're hard to get back. The ice onion can be found towards the end of the 4th area, the hero's hideaway. So that's around half of the game where the player will not be able to freely grow their ice Pikmin population. This extends to all other types of Pikmin as well. While the yellows and blues can be found in caves in the first area, their onions are a little harder to find. They're in the same first area, but hidden behind obstacles that can't be overcome right away. So for a limited time, the once common yellows and blues have to be treated like precious cargo. Do you want to cross that body of water with your blue dudes? Well, is it worth the risk? The rock and winged Pikmin operate in a similar fashion to the ice. The rock Pikmin can first be found in the Blossoming Arcadia, the second area of the game. Their onion lies in the 5th area, the Giant's Hearth. And the winged Pikmin can be discovered in Serene Shores, the 3rd area, but their onion lies in the Primordial Thicket, the 6th and final area. So as the game progresses, there will always be at least one type of Pikmin that is more precious than the rest. The attitude that applies to the purples and whites in Pikmin II applies to the 7 other types of Pikmin at one point or another. This pattern encourages the player to be more careful in their playstyle and more strategic in how they accomplish tasks. There are few problems in any Pikmin game that can't be solved by throwing a bunch of little dudes in an obstacle, but in Pikmin IV, it's harder to just spam the A button until the problem goes away. In Pikmin IV, an ice Pikmin death means a lot more than it would if the player had a functionally infinite supply of them. The same goes for the rock, winged, purple, and white. Oh, Right, the purple and white Pikmin, they return in this entry, and this time they have onions. Except, they're pretty hard to get. They're not found in the main storyline, they're found by completing bonus Dandori challenges, which only unlock after first completing a somewhat lengthy side story. If you ask me, these onions act more as completion rewards than collectibles. For the majority of the story, the purples and whites act the same way they do in Pikmin II. They're the most scarce of the bunch. While Pikmin IV challenges the player with time challenges and hostile caves and multitasking, its overarching challenge comes from bottlenecking the new recruits' populations. In Pikmin IV, losing a single Pikmin can be devastating. On a first playthrough, it's hard to know when the player will have an opportunity to get it back. Watching a group of Pikmin die not only makes the player feel bad, but there are tangible consequences. You might not be able to freeze that pond or carry that treasure back to base. You want your Pikmin to live so they, and you, can succeed. Pikmin is a series of contradictions. I find it interesting how the core gameplay of Pikmin has remained virtually unchanged from the series' inception, yet each mainline game feels completely different from one another. All that really changes, beyond new Pikmin types and locale changes, is which finite resource is the most finite. Put Louie and the purples in Pikmin 1, and that clock will still be the greatest enemy. As a series, Pikmin shows how relatively small gameplay tweaks can have drastic impacts on how a player interacts with the title. The most precious resource, the perceived difficulty, the way in which problems are solved, they all change with each escape from the distant planet.